Welcome everyone. Today we have our another episode and we will discuss about global peace. We have our world famous speaker Professor Edward, Professor Rob and Mr. Marshall, as well as we have our new friends from Bhutan, Mr. Jackson, and from Uzbekistan, Professor Noon Nazar. Thank you for joining today's sessions. And yes, definitely World Talent Economy Forum focus on the developing worlds. So definitely our new friends will be very valuable, and definitely we get a very interesting guideline from our honorable speakers from the developed world. Professor Edward, what you want to add today?
Okay, well, I want to start off. I'll say a few things that I said in an earlier show about the war that we're in right now, and that is with the Russian war with Ukraine. But really, it's a global war now. We've seen the world is now dividing into free and authoritarian or totalitarian. The reasons for the war were somewhere kind of more policy oriented. For example, over the last 20 years, the West, especially the United States, has not invaded Georgia when he invaded Ukraine the first time, when he tried to murder the president of Ukraine a couple of presidents ago. I knew the president's wife, by the way, and we didn't react very strongly to that. Plus Putin was looking at Joe Biden. He saw how Joe Biden completely fumbled the attempt to get bases in Iraq, minimal bases to stay in Iraq so that ISIS wouldn't arise. And of course, he as vice president, he didn't do that, and so that let loose ISIS. We saw how he did in Afghanistan. So that was the first reason why Putin thought he could get away with this. The second, of course, is that the Germans in particular decided foolishly that they wanted to abandon all fossil fuel and all nuclear, except you can't run a major economy without it. So basically, they became addicted to Russian fuel, and the Russians thought, well, we can get away because the Germans and the Europeans are addicted to us. And I'm happy to say that the West has reacted very strongly, as well they should. So that's the good news. But here's the thing. What about peace? What about the long term? Okay. And by the way, I worked and some of you know, I worked in the then Soviet Union in 1989 and 1990. I was there even earlier, and I was there afterwards, and I worked in the Baltics as well. And I'll be quite frank, I was trying to bring down that regime. I wanted to destroy communism. I had a small part in it, and nothing that required me to kill anyone, fortunately. But basically promoting free markets. I'll get back to that in a minute. Okay. The world now is going into another kind of Cold War. The Chinese, of course, are becoming more totalitarian, unfortunately. You see regimes like North Korea that's been around for quite a while, and Venezuela and Iran. So what do we do in the long term to create a peaceful world? I'll say a couple of things. First of all, you have to focus on institutions. And the first and most important thing is domestically, and this is what Malaysia is doing and a lot of countries are doing. You have to have free markets that allow entrepreneurs to do their thing and to prosper through their own efforts. I want to show you something that's an example of this. See this nice new logo that I have for my organization? Isn't that nice? And here's another one. This is just a different version of it. Now, where did those come from? Well, I went through a contest thing where I paid a certain amount of money, and they put out that this guy, me, wants a new logo, and here are some of the things that I like and don't like and so forth. And they put it out there. And the company that won was Anamonan, can't pronounce it very well, in Creative in Java in Indonesia. And I hope that my Indonesian friends who created this wonderful logo are listening right now. But they're part of the target audience of the World Talent Economic Forum. They're the entrepreneurs in the emerging economies who are prospering through their own efforts. That's the first thing for peace. Is you have to have a free market system in which people prosper by creating value rather than stealing it like corrupt oligarchs do or whatever. Second, you have to have an open system where you're open to free speech, free discussions, to do what we're having right here, right now. And unfortunately, what you've seen in China is China initially 40 years ago opened up to entrepreneurs. That's why they've gone from having 9 out of 10 Chinese living in abject poverty to only 1 in 10. That's the good news. But now, of course, they do not have an open society. They crush free speech. They put Muslims who they don't agree with in concentration camps. They have crushed the freedom lovers in Hong Kong, and they're threatening Taiwan right now. They are on the bad side. But you need freedom to discuss and to exchange ideas. The next thing you need in terms of institutions is you need an honest, limited government that's controlled by the people, but is limited and doesn't rule the people. That's very important. And again, if you look at the Index of Economic Freedom, which I helped devise, you'll see that the countries that do worse do not have that kind of government control. And finally, you need international trade. I like to say, make trade, not war. I would rather spend my money with some fine person in Indonesia who's making me this thing than to have a war with Indonesia or any other country for that matter. International trade is very, very important because it's creating value and trading value for value. It's not a zero-sum game. Everyone benefits from it. Okay, that's important. The second thing is very important is culture. Again, I worked in the then Soviet Union promoting free markets, and I worked in the Baltics as well. And the thing that the Russians have not been able to do is get rid of their culture, where they basically went from being an authoritarian monarchy with serfs who were freed not that many decades before the communists took over to a communist, a totalitarian system. They had a saying in Russia, in the Soviet Union, we pretend to work, they pretend to pay us. And unfortunately, it went to becoming a very corrupt system and a very tribal system. Part of Putin's motivation is, I want to make Russia great again. Does that sound familiar? And rather than doing it by letting his entrepreneurs flourish, he wants to do it by, I want to take over Ukraine, then I want to take over the Baltics, who are doing so much better than Russia, and so forth. That kind of tribalism is, of course, the essence of what creates wars. Individualism is the opposite of collectivism and tribalism. It means I'm going to do what I love to do. You're going to do what you guys love to do. We're going to trade with one another. That's how we all benefit. Where's the path ahead? The path ahead is young people. The people who are listening to the World Talent Economic Forum, the nice folks who did my new logo. They're the future. I'll tell you a little story about Russia right now. Here in the state of Maryland, right at the shore, we have a town called Ocean City, and it's a tourist town. And during the summer, it's absolutely filled with tourists who like to swim and go to the restaurants and enjoy all the amusement parks and all. And if you go there during any summer, who's often working in the little shops and all? They're Russians. They're young Russians who have come over here as a regular thing to just kind of do their summer in America, working, in this case, in a tourist place. But you know what it is? They get exposed to America. They get exposed to the fact that on the boardwalk you have Black people and white people and Hispanic people and people from all over the world, all over the different ethnic groups. They learn that they can make money by providing value and services. They learn that they can enjoy themselves. They learn they can say whatever they want. Do they like this or do they not like this? Those are the people who are going to Russia, and those are the ones who are out in the streets now demonstrating. We see the same thing in Africa with some of the African groups that Sharif, you and I know quite well, where young Africans now are saying, we don't like the corrupt, vile systems that we have. We want a freer system. We see that in Asia. And so that in the long term, I think, is going to be what changes the culture of countries so that they're more oriented towards peace. I want to say one final thing, and then I have to go off, and then I'll come back, hopefully. Be very careful about the word justice. The word justice philosophically is a very good word. But unfortunately in America, justice more and more has come to mean it's just that someone who has created so much value, like a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk, should give it to a politician so that they can give it out to someone else. Justice has become this empty word that simply means I'm going to steal from somebody else and I'm going to call it justice. So you've got to be careful about that word. I usually avoid the word, even though I believe that there is a valid reason for word for justice, and it's justice before the law, equal treatment before the law. And that means free markets, meaning that I can compete with somebody, even if they're the brother-in-law of the minister of whatever. So this, I think, in the long run, is going to be the path to me. Free markets, free trade, and a culture of individualism where people can profit by, again, make trade, not war. Peace.
Thank you,
And
Professor
I'll be back
Edward.
hopefully in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you for joining today. Actually, thank you. In World Talent Economy Forum, we have many good speakers from North America, from USA, from Europe. Today, I will introduce one of the good countries. It's actually Bhutan. My friend actually Jackson, very energetic. Why I'm introducing him in this uh, session, because Bhutan is a very small country, but they are very peaceful. Their positions is 19 out of 163 three countries. So this is the most peaceful country in South Asia. They are one and only, according to GPI report 2020. Bhutan is one only country out of Europe and Asia Pacific, those who are in top 20 positions. So that's why we are presenting as World Talent Economy Forum, representing developing nations. So Bhutan is a part of developing nations, and their contributions in the peace, global peace, is very important. So, Mr. Jackson, what you want to share for our audience and especially for our professors and our speakers?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, participate in today's program. And today's topic is global peace, and it's very, very important. And to, have a peaceful world is the dream of, every citizens of this world. But unfortunately, we are still struggling to, achieve these dreams. Okay, so this is a very, very complex issues. And fortunately, I'm from Bhutan, which is a very small country, but very, very unique in terms of its traditions and so many other things. Okay, so we are actually, although we are a small country, but we enjoy very, very, yeah, we enjoy peace in Bhutan, and that because of our great leaders, especially our beloved kings, who have vision so many great policies in place. So we have something called the gross national happiness, which takes care of environment, good governance, and so many things. So that way, I feel so lucky to be born in Bhutan, and Bhutan right now is the only carbon negative country in the world. So I just want to share that I also want a world which is fair and peaceful for everyone. That's why I have started this initiative called Global Village Connection. The idea is to create a better world. So my observation is that although there are millions of people trying to do something for this world, but unfortunately, our world is not getting better. Okay, so I found out that there's something missing. So the biggest missing link is that we are all uh, uh, trying to do something, but we are not a single force. We are not united. So that is what I'm trying to create right now. I'm trying to unite the people of the world. And I am already connected with people from more than 150 countries in the world over the 2 years. And we are really intending to create a very, very huge global network, something like 300 to 500 million people by this year alone, okay? And what we have seen recently, the war in Ukraine is unfortunately very, very sad. And in this 21st century, it's so painful to see that we human beings, although we have got the opportunity to learn and be educated and so many things, so many developments taking place in terms of IT and everything, but we are still missing something, the very basic thing, okay? The very basic thing of love and compassion and respect for each other. So this is something that this is where very simple. Of course, it looks very, very complex, but this is something we can achieve, okay? So we need to educate our people. And when I talk about educating the people, it needs to start from the leaders, okay? So in this case, when we are talking about peace, we need to first educate the religious leaders of the world from the different religions, okay? How to teach not on the religious principles, but based on simple understanding of love and compassion. Okay, so that is what I see as a problem, because we still fail to educate and understand the simple, thing in life. And so many people, apart from this war, I have seen that in many countries. Okay, the minorities are getting marginalized. They are suffering. The people, the minorities. For example, in some countries, this is a Muslim majority country, the Hindus are suffering. Similarly, where there is a Hindu majority. Okay, so this religion actually is a very good thing, but it is like acting like a poison right now, because we have failed to understand, and the religious leaders have failed to teach the basic, as I said, like meaning of love and compassion and all these things. Okay, so we need to work on at so many levels right now, and for uh, uh, us to be able to see better dreams of a peaceful world, again, as I said, we need to all come together. Okay, I'm not really going to blame the governments in the different countries. Okay, now let the governments do their own thing, but we, the people, need to come together. Okay, unless and until we ourselves come together, involved in this, peace building, or to create a better world for the welfare and also for the green and clean earth. Okay, for this world, we all need to come together. That is the most important thing, and that is what I'm building right now. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. And I have so many other thousands of, so many things to tell, but maybe in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Thank you. Uh, Mr. Marshall, what you want to add for today's discussion?
Well, thank you, Sharif. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a sore throat here, but I'm good. Nothing to do with COVID. Just it's very cold here, so caught a cold. Basically, I agree with Jackson. I think Jackson's position is very strong from the point of view of aspiration of getting to peace. I think in order to look at, I'm going to approach this from a form of discussion about human psychology. And so the reason is because my background in clinical psychology brings to the fruition of, if you look at children and how they play, many children, if left to their own devices, are able to get together. And if they don't look at each other's color of their skin or what their features look like, they play together very well. However, over time, as children grow up, sometimes you see behaviors such as bullying. Bullying means that you're pushing other people around. And what we're seeing on a global stage is a form of bullying. It's not the first time in our history, and I doubt that it will be the last time. So I agree to the aspirations of Jackson, but the question is, due to the human nature and due to the way people are as he pointed out, culturally raised, and we have one culture denigrates another culture and vice versa, and we've seen that. He described that very adequately. The question is, how does one bring one people together? How do we bring all people together? I think there was a science fiction movie not long ago that people were fighting each other, and then people from outer space came to take over the earth, and suddenly all of humanity coalesced together to fight the common enemy. So who are the aliens that are attacking the world now? Are there aliens? And I contend there are, but they're not beings from outer space. It's ironically our own history of the past 200 to 300 years. And that is, industrialization has brought this about. We have a climate crisis on our hands that is a existential threat to everyone on this planet. I noticed one of our other, Edward, who left for the moment, and hopefully he'll come back, talked about the concept that people, Europe decided they wanted to go away from fossil fuels. They can't do that. Well, I understand why he wants to, promote that, because, I believe he works with fossil fuel companies, so it makes sense. But But frankly, the science is in, and I have a graphic on my LinkedIn that shows what's going on with the climate crisis. And that graphic shows a spiral that's coming up from 1880 to 2022 to this very year. And the temperature rise is dramatic. 1880 was the adoption of the internal combustion engine, and then it began to escalate. And what we've seen is it went down and it went up and it went down and it went up. And suddenly, in the past 20 years, it's gone up exponentially. And we know from other scientists, and other academics and other professors, that the climate crisis is real. It's not fake. And it affects everybody. It doesn't care if you're Putin. It doesn't care if you're Biden. It doesn't care who you are. It's going to affect all of us and all our children and our grandchildren. So I think we need to take a look at that and make that our enemy. Our enemy is the climate crisis. There was a cartoon not long ago at the beginning of 2020 that showed a city on the border of.
Mr. Marshall, just one thing. I just sorry, I interrupt you. Like global peace, even few points we want what's going on in Europe, especially Ukraine and these things. We did discuss a lot about the climate change. This is very important for us. But for today's discussion, we want to more focus on global peace, which is immediate. Let's say this Ukraine and this Russian war. We want to stop it now. So this area, even our other speaker, I'm sure, Professor Rob.
Well, then Sharif, what I'll do is I think that I'll just pivot to what you want me to do to talk about. And I just have a very quick statement on that. I think that Putin is a bully. That's what I was bringing up, that he's behaving like a child as a bully. We've seen this in history before. Hitler was a bully. Stalin had Marshal Zhukov, not named after me, obviously, but somebody who he could talk to and get the truth from. It's interesting that Putin sits in a bunker, literally in a bunker, because he's afraid he's going to be assassinated. And the only other person that I know that sits in a bunker on an ongoing basis is Nasrallah in Lebanon, because he's afraid he's going to be assassinated. And this is a form of terrorism. So if you're going to be a terrorist, then you're not for world peace. So the question I have for everybody on this panel is, how do you get rid of the bullies unless you're going to have another war? Unless you're going to do it by physical removal. That's what happened in World War II. Hitler wasn't going anywhere. In fact, he was trying to take over the world. So how does anybody on this panel have a solution to get rid of Putin so we don't have this type of threat? And I think that it's going to be a very fine line to strive for. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, all of we actually against war. Professor Rob, I know you have a very strong point. Even in social media, you post very interesting topics, very interesting issues. We want to know more about these issues. Even World Talent Economy Forum, we are against war, any kind of war around the world. Yes.
Yeah. So when solving any problem, you have to kind of go to the root cause of the problem and address it definitively. After the Second World War, we created the United Nations. The idea of the United Nations was to prevent a third world war. The reason the United Nations doesn't work is the very governments that wanted to form the United Nations didn't want to be beholden to the United Nations. They didn't want the United Nations to have authority over them. And you can't have a police department, which is really what the United Nations is supposed to be, a police department across nations, where some people are above the law. It just fundamentally doesn't work. And the Security Council in the United Nations is effectively above the law. You can't enforce anything against them. And the governments that support the United Nations are famous for underpaying their commitment. So the United Nations remains underfunded and understaffed. So it can't perform the role of a peacekeeper. We recognize that in the world, and Marshall was kind of dancing around this, I think, a little bit, is there are bad people, psychopaths, people that don't have compassion, that may be driven very heavily by status and power, and have a tendency of taking over governments and running them. Putin is one of those guys. I'd argue Donald Trump was one of those guys. We've had leaders probably in every government across the world from time to time that were one of those guys, where the rules only applied to others, and they lived in a Machiavellian environment where the end always justified the means, which is problematic. If you want to solve for apparent human behavior, people that lack compassion, really are only driven by power and status, then you have to have something that's powerful enough to remove them from power or to respond with global resources when they misact. If we watch what was happening between Russia and Ukraine, the right action by NATO would have been to move resources into the Ukraine when the threat first emerged and Russia was amassing resources in the border. Because if you're NATO, if you're going to have a war, you'd be better off fighting that war on somebody else's turf rather than your own. That's just basic logistics. The defending Ukraine made more long-term strategic sense than waiting until Russia crosses over Ukraine and goes into Poland. Because now if they go into Poland, Poland's already suffering through a massive amount of refugees that have come out of Ukraine, which lowers their ability to respond and makes any attack on that country far more devastating. And now we're far more likely to go into a full-blown World War III. Though another problem we seem to have right now is we're not acknowledging we're in World War III. The fact of the matter is that the definition of a world war is when lots of countries all over the world are engaged in some way, shape, or form in conflict. The West is supplying the Ukraine. It looks like China is about to start supplying Russia. That's a world war. The economic aspects of this are global, but the politicians don't want to call it what it is. Much like we had with the pandemic, they didn't want to call it a pandemic until it was so friggin' over the top that that normal mediation techniques no longer functioned. Had they been able to contain the pandemic in China, it wouldn't have been a pandemic. As soon as it jumped borders, and it jumped borders long before people realized it was a pandemic, but we resisted calling it that. So the difficulty comes back into how do you create an organization, a function that can prevent war, and to go to the heart of this. And by the way, not to mention global warming, but Marshall's bringing up global warming is the point, because one of the reasons you have wars is over resources. And global warming is causing a huge change in where those resources are. And we also know that excessive heat that does cause people to become more violent by nature. So we're heading towards a period of time that, unless we do something definitive, is going to be fraught with more wars, more global conflicts. My expectation is, and I think it's unfortunate, that typically we only respond to a major event when that major event becomes so over the top we can't ignore it. With Putin threatening nuclear weapons, and with the guidance with regard to Russian military putting tactical nuclear weapons in the same class as thermobaric and cluster bombs, both of which are considered war crimes, and both of which have been used in Ukraine. It's just a matter of time before we get a launch of a tactical nuclear weapon, and then what happens? Then we get tactical responses, and then we start really sweating about the really big bombs that Putin has been talking about launching. My expectation is, if we survive this, the mass amount of death that escalation will cause will force the world into doing something far more definitive. Certainly, the smaller countries are likely to rise up against their larger neighbors because they don't want to be the collateral damage in this war. And if you look at it, a lot of the damage right now in the Ukraine war is global. It's supply chain stuff. Ukraine makes 50% of the neon in the world, which is used heavily in microprocessor manufacturing, and the lack of that resource is going to create a huge drag on our ability to use technology to fight things like climate change and famine in the world. So we're kind of right now cutting off our nose and feet for no particular reason. And largely because of the fact we do not have an enforcement capability in the world that can stand up to one of the major powers. And if that doesn't get corrected, we're going to continue to have world wars because there will be people that will rise up into power over their militaries that are psychopathic, that lack the compassion, that believe in Machiavellian techniques, and will start a war as foolish as this one is, but simply on the belief that they can win it. And the big concern right now here is that Russia seems to think they can actually win a nuclear war now, and that's really dangerous. Because the conventional thought is nobody wins a nuclear war. The amount of collateral world damage is an existential threat. We kind of talked about that on Friday. So in the end, if we're going to have world peace, we have to have a defense for those people that get into power that can do damage on a global basis. And until we have that defense, whether we're talking artificial intelligence, whether we're talking about nuclear weapons, whether we're talking about bioweapons, we are facing a future where one of those things is going to be released by one of the people that has no compassion, that is only focused on power and status. And it might be released as a last ditch. I mean, you think about Hitler in his bunker at the end of World War II. I would bet if he had a red button where he could launch nukes before he committed suicide, he would have hit that button. And you do not want people in power that have that kind of decision tree in front of them ever. And the only way you take that away from them is you have some kind of mitigating organization that's global in nature that can rally the globe's resources to stamp out wars like this really before they even get started. Have the power to remove politicians from office, have the power to do whatever it takes to stop a war like this from even starting. And NATO's clearly shown itself to be toothless. United Nations has now shown itself to be largely toothless. And both of those organizations are effectively corrupted at their heart because of the very nature of the organizations. So in the end, if we really want global peace, we need to have an effort to create an organization, effectively a law enforcement organization that has the power to enforce the global laws against countries, regardless of how big the country is, whether it's the United States or China or Russia, or anybody else. And we do not have that today. And until we do, we'll continue to have the threat of global conflict.
Thank you, Professor Rob. We have our another professor from Uzbekistan, Professor Noor Nazar. So we want to know the impact, global, what is happening in your country, and what you want to add for global peace, as well as is there an impact from this European crisis to your country? Can you unmute, please, Professor Noor Nazar? Yeah. Mr. Noor, yeah. Yes.
Are you hear me? Are you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In my country is all good, no problems. I don't want to talk the situation the Ukraine or I want to talk you uh, only global peace. When it comes of issue of global peace, we are respective of different worldviews, and first of all, we have to talk about the original meaning of the word peace. I think peace is a supreme blessing because without peace we cannot imagine any developments. But as the most basic measure of peace, I want to raise of consequences because the pure or mind of more creative is ideas in it. In cancellation, I can say that if we act cancellation, everything will fall into place. I think it is a mistake in terms or moral norms for us the analysts any domestic or foreign policy or the status with the issuer of peace willing standing on other parts of the world. As a suggestion, people's mind should be irrigated with creative ideas and spirituality. not just a possibility of buying wealth. And funds should be directed to education, not armaments. Because I know that knowledge is of the basic of peace. Thanks for your attention.
Thank
It's
you. Thank you.
short my minds.
Thank you. Thank you for joining today's session, Professor Edward. Especially if you have any suggestion that how we can solve this Ukraine and Russian problem, or how diplomatically we can solve these things, or what will be the future? Do you think that it goes more wrong way and it creates more problem for us?
Well, it does. It certainly poses a problem for us. We've seen dictators and thugs throughout history, and of course, in the last century. The thing is, they didn't have nuclear weapons, and this is the first time that even during the Soviet era, the Soviet Union didn't directly threaten us with nuclear weapons. We had a balance of I call it a balance of terror, mutual assured destruction, and the assumption was that the Soviets, as bad as they might be, didn't want to have their country destroyed, and same for us. And so we were always very careful not to move in that direction. Unfortunately, we have a thug and a sociopath, leading the Soviet Union, and like again, like a really bad dictator who really seems to be out of touch and might even try using nuclear weapons. Maybe he's bluffing. We don't know. But the fact that he's even mentioning that indicates that we're dealing with a very different situation. The best possible outcome would be that his own people overthrow him, that they see that Ukraine is essentially going to be to Russia and to Putin as Stalingrad was to Hitler and the Nazis, that it's going to be very costly. They're not going to be able to hold it down very well if they take Ukraine. They're going to have guerrilla fighting in the streets. It's going to bleed Russia. And plus you have a lot of the oligarchs around Putin are, being harmed by the sanctions. And ideally what happens is they, in one way or another, go to him and say, okay, you have to pull back, step down, whatever, or perhaps simply kill him. Sorry, this is realpolitik. This isn't playing games anymore. That's what's happened in other countries. But unfortunately, we're in a very bad situation right now that I think we put ourselves into it because normally a good leader at least leaves themselves some exit strategy. So if they're losing, they can say, well, our job is done here. We've kind of done what we wanted to do. And, we've got the attention of the Ukrainians, so they're not going to mistreat Russians anymore. Well, that's not what's in Putin's mind. I don't see a really good, and again, I've worked in international relations for decades, and I don't really see a good exit strategy apart from his own people getting rid of him. What's interesting is you probably saw the stories that the Chinese are denying that he has gone to China for weapons because he's been so bogged down in Ukraine and done such a poor job of the with Ukraine. I would like to see the West put in as much as they can get into Ukraine in terms of weapons, because again, this is not a philosophy discussion anymore. This is a war, and to the extent that it's going to be very costly for Putin, some of his own people might tell him back off, either gently or in some other way. The other thing is that we have to make sure that NATO is very strong in the Baltics, where I've worked, and some of you other folks might have worked, certainly in Poland and places like that, and basically say, you might take Ukraine, but you're not going to take anything else. And that's the whole idea of a tripwire that NATO was set up for, that, that they're not going to kill NATO troops because they know that's going to be a real war. I wish I could give a more positive view of this. The other thing again that I think would be very good is if young Russians would go out on the street more. I mean, something like 1,500 of them have been arrested. But this is one of the things I mentioned in an earlier show. I think it was April of 2009, 1 million Iranians, mostly young people, went out into the streets demonstrating against the mullahs, saying, we want liberty. And instead of doing what Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher did when Russians were opposing the communist regime and saying, we're behind you, speak up, we've got your back. Basically, Barack Obama simply said, well, we want peace and we don't want anyone to be hurt. And rather than saying, yes, you million people are right, we're behind you and so forth, giving them courage. That's, what should have happened back then. Biden, I think, has the chance, and I would like to see him and all the other Western leaders say, we want the young people, especially of Russia, to understand they shouldn't be cannon fodder to this dictator, and go out into the streets and, and make your voices known. Yes, you're going to be arrested, but look, if there were 500,000 people in Red Square in Moscow, they wouldn't have enough troops to shoot them down, because they've got a security force that might want to shoot them down. But the troops themselves, the draftees and so forth, are probably going to be reluctant to shoot down thousands of people, because those thousands of people are going to include their mothers and fathers and cousins and brothers and so forth. So that would be the best thing, is for the Russians themselves to come out in the streets and say, you've got to pull back. We don't want to be cannon fodder for your stupid war. So again, I like to say, make trade, not war. And I hope in the long run, that's what happens.
Yeah, one of the complex questions before I go to my friends, because he's from South Asia, especially we observe, like especially Imran Khan from South Asia, he actually questions about the role of NATO. That's why India, Pakistan, even Bangladesh, especially South Asia, they do not, yes, they are against war, but they do not support the initiative of NATO, because NATO cannot create enough trustworthy relationship around the world. Even though Imran Khan actually claiming that 80,000 people die inside Pakistan because of NATO, because they support previously NATO. But they never say thanks to Pakistan governments. So why they should support, or they take the initiative of NATO? Do you think even the same conflict, same mindset, same untrust, I want to say, in between Russia and Ukraine, and reality is that NATO actually do not helping Ukraine. Even their Ukraine president several times, he bring this point in social media. We are not getting any helps. This is not the real help. He requests for no-fly zone. So do you believe NATO playing the right role, and do you believe that their wrong strategy actually, because of their wrong strategy right now, Ukraine face the problem?
I think it's a very good question. And because I've been critical of NATO for not looking ahead enough. I mean, I've mentioned that in a sense, the Germans made their own problems by becoming addicted to Russian oil. That meant NATO had to be very careful. And by the way, remember, the West tried to get Russia to join them. Vladimir Putin was a member of the G8 at the time. And we wanted Russia to be, join this international community, trade with us, prosper with us and all. But that's not the way Putin went. But I think you're right about NATO. And by the way, that's why I mentioned that if you put yourselves in the head of the opponents, in this case in Putin, what is Putin thinking when he looks at the fact that NATO sort of along the way let him get away with a lot of stuff? Or again, I mentioned that Biden personally was tasked as vice president to negotiate a base deal in Iraq, which should have been very easy, to keep basically limited troops so that we didn't have Islamists come up. He wasn't even able to do that. Putin certainly was looking at that and saying, this guy is incompetent. He was certainly looking at Biden, what happened in Afghanistan. And by the way, remember, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was meant, of course, just for Europe and not for India, Pakistan, and that area. But
in
again,
Afghanistan, where I believe
that Afghanistan, in Afghanistan, that was
what actually Prime Minister of Pakistan actually
right
publicly he bring this point.
Yeah. And so, and of course, by the way, ideally, NATO shouldn't have been in maybe those areas, though I think it was valid to say that once we had the 9/11 terrorist attacks, it was quite appropriate for the United States with its other allies to go into Afghanistan and to overthrow that government. And I thought it was disgraceful the way they pulled out so suddenly, leaving a lot of our allies and friends there. And I think the Iraqi invasion in retrospect, the reasons were wrong. It turns out they didn't have the weapons of mass destruction. But this gets back to my earlier point about, in the long term, we have to foster a community of values that's around. For example, peace. It's interesting because in Israel, one of the things that did happen is good news in the last couple of years is the Abraham Accords, which instead of the surrounding countries saying, well, let's try to figure out the next war to destroy Israel, why don't we just make trade, not war? And so you see that you have some countries now in the Middle East that are Muslim countries that are prosperous, that have lots of entrepreneurs that are working with Israel and anybody else for that matter. And so I think that's another good model. But in the short term, it is a problem with NATO because I think they were negligent. Remember, when I was there in the 1980s, the Germans were opposing some of the moves of Ronald Reagan, which in the end pressured the Soviet Union to collapse. And the Germans wanted to sort of make peace, but in a way that I thought was very weak. And I'm sure that the communist governments were looking at that. Fortunately, things worked out, at least in terms of the fall of communism. By the way, I think I mentioned in a previous show, I was in Moscow in December 1989, meeting with reformers and dissidents. And then I went on to the Baltics, to Estonia. And I remember one of them saying, because we heard the words of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, it gave us courage to speak up and to try to create a more open society. And of course they tried, but sadly that failed. But the point is well made about the problems of trust. Why should India trust the West when you see exactly what Biden did in Afghanistan, whether you agree with that war initially or not? Look at the way he handled it. So should India say, hey, we're going to put our fate into the hands of Joe Biden? And by the way, this is not an endorsement of Donald Trump either. Some of the stuff Donald Trump has said about Putin I think it's just absolutely disgraceful. So I'm not taking sides that way.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Jackson. So what do you want to say specifically when actually, let's say we are observing that specifically the South Asia, because every country should support Ukraine, and we definitely have to be more effective in this kind of war. Yes, there are more crises we are observing in Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Africa. So definitely all of us actually against war. So how you want to share your views and how actually South Asia, especially, they should play their role uh, to solve this problem or how they should react.
Yeah, so I would not like to blame any countries or whatsoever, but one thing I'm very clear that all the people of the world must be brave enough to say that this is something very, very bad what is happening, okay? And any of our suggestion, ideas whatsoever would not have that much of, chance of changing the situation there, okay? So, yeah, but on a long-term basis, okay, we really need to address this, issues, and this is not very easy, as I understand, because all the systems that we have right now have been developed over so many decades or centuries. Okay, so it's very difficult to undo everything at once. But we need to have that vision and the goal to change things. Okay, and as I said, I'm very much determined to unite the people of the world to bring or create a different, scenario, situation. So I'm still in the process of coming up with a very high level concept of creating a new new world, or I would call it as a new world initiative. So I have come up with the six concepts, and one of them is, we need to, the people of the world must fight for demilitarization. uh, I don't think that at this point of time, or in the 21st century, or hereafter, no country in the world should spend their, resources on building this military. And as said by the other speakers, it's very unfortunate that many countries right now are in possession of these nuclear capabilities. Okay, so there's no quick fix to this problem right now, but we must, the people of the world must fight for every country to, make this world free of these nuclear weapons. Okay, and yeah, as I said, these systems, whatsoever is happening right now, has been built over so many centuries, decades. So it's very difficult, to offer a, quick fix, a solution to this present problem. But definitely, given the kind of situation where now Russia is bullying Ukraine, I think Ukraine deserves the support of every country in the world, countries in the world. And of course, I would like to see that, there's not, further drastic interventions, from the other countries right now in terms of military, because there's a danger that, the Russia might, use its nuclear weapons, and it is going to be very catastrophic to the world. So we have to really understand that present situation, and in any way, of course, at this point of time, all the countries or people of the world must support, I think, Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, Sharif, I think that Jackson has pointed out some very salient attributes of what's going on in the world. I also think that I think as Ed pointed out before, prior to World War II, and it was a world war, had Hitler had nuclear weapons, he would most likely use them, because that was his fatal flaw. He went to the death, and I don't think he would have been problematic taking everybody with him. So the question is Putin the same? Obviously, he's overcoming the Ukraine. He's trying to overcome the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are putting up a fight that he wasn't expecting. Unlike Stalin, who had Marshal Zhukov to tell him what was really going on, it doesn't seem like Putin does. He's in a bunker. He's cut himself off. And pictures are worth 1,000 words. That picture of him at one end of a long table and arguing with his own security staff and intelligence people kind of indicates that he is isolated, but they're fearful of him. So when the bully rules, the bully rules. If somebody can come up with a solution, and I think Ed came up with it, get rid of him, fine. But until that happens, if he can do what, and I'm not sure he can, but assuming that he can launch nuclear weapons, I think he's always going to be the bully in the room. And I think that's one of the reasons, I don't care who the president of the United States is, I don't think any president of the United States want to expose U.S. citizens, let alone the rest of the world, to nuclear weapons. So if people think that, and they're willing to go to war, I think that's one of the reasons why NATO is reticent about helping the Ukraine and putting a fly zone, because when you do that, you're putting U.S. pilots predominantly over the air and running into Russian pilots. Once that fight occurs, all bets are off. If you think otherwise, then I'll make you the leader of the world. Okay? If you believe that that NATO is the fault, okay, and we're not going to blame Putin for his own behavior. It's like going into a schoolyard and watching the bully beat everybody up, but we're not going to blame the bully. We're going to blame the victims. I'm not of that. I was never taught by my parents to blame the victims. So if you want to blame NATO, and yes, you can blame the current president of the United States, or you can blame the Germans, but ultimately they made their decisions not based upon bullying. They made their decisions trying to They made their decisions based upon what they thought was in the best interest of peace. Obviously, how does a bully operate? They threaten others, and others are fearful. So you're creating fear. If anybody on this dialogue and this panel can come up with a solution of overcoming fear of the victims of the bully and how to get rid of the bully, then we will have world peace. And I welcome everybody to do that. I myself only think that the only way this is going to happen is if Putin is not in charge. However that happens.
Yeah.
But as long as he's in charge, he's the bully.
Yeah.
He's the bully in the schoolyard, and he's going to dominate. Somebody needs to come along and take out the bully. Otherwise, and as best as Ed said, get your own people to do it. But look what he did. He bullied his own people. If you even go out in the streets, and I noticed that Ed didn't mention this, but if you go out in the streets and you demonstrate, even they will. And he says you get half a million people out in the Red Square. Well, people are fearful for their own lives and for their own children. So what's going to happen? Those people, they're going to make. That's how bullies work. They take one example, put them in jail for 15 years, and who knows if they even survive those 15 years in Russian jails. And I think that the overcoming a bully is not about putting those people in the. Sure, the Iranians had millions of people, but at the end of the day, the Ayatollahs know how to bully, just like the Putin does. A dictator is a dictator, and unless they're taken out physically, I don't see any realm or opportunity as long as the bully is in the schoolyard, and the bully will dominate the schoolyard. So I agree with Ed on one sense that if everybody stands up to the bully, then the bully has nowhere to go. But in this case, this bully has nuclear weapons.
Yep.
So if Ed is willing to risk nuclear destruction, then okay. If everybody else on this panel is willing to risk nuclear destruction, I don't think we have a simple answer to this. Everybody seems to be looking for the simple answer. I don't think it's simple. You're dealing with a very complex world, and I think what Jackson pointed out, I think, is a method to achieve that. We need to do this in incremental steps, and it needs to be thought out very carefully. If we don't do that, then we won't be having these forums anymore because we will all be dead from nuclear war. So, in my opinion, I think that people have to be cautious, and they have to stand up to the bully. I'm certainly not going to stand up. In school, I stood up to bullies. I got beaten up, but my father taught me how to defend myself. So I recommend that everybody in this world who cares about what Jackson has spoken about and spoken to the truth is that we need to focus on what the major threats are. The immediate threat is what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But believe me, Putin is not going to stop in Ukraine. He's going to go to the next place over, and he's going to go to the next place. And I believe, it's my opinion, that he won't stop. He'll go to NATO because he thinks he has nuclear weapons. And I don't think he cares whether you die or I die or even his own children die. Mm-hmm. That's because you're dealing with a psychopath. Yep. And when you're dealing with a psychopath, they don't care. Mm-hmm. If somebody cared, then they would be like Jackson, me, and everybody on this panel. Mm-hmm. We would care about what's going on. Yep. So, unfortunately, I'm not the one with the answer. I'm not here for world peace in the sense that I can solve it. I'm here for world peace to support it. But in order to support it, you have to have cooperation. If Putin is going to continue to bully Ukraine and others, we're not having world peace. In fact, we may have the end of the world. So that's my 2 cents. Sorry to be so negative, but that's the way I see it.
No. Thank you. You have your views, but definitely in the upcoming session, we will discuss more about other wire, like this Middle East wire, maybe even in Kashmir.
I lost the audio, so I'm going to have to leave and come back in.
Okay. Thank you. Professor Rob, what you want to add? Definitely, it will be very interesting for us.
Well, let's go back to the no-fly zone and why that doesn't work at the moment. The bigger issue for me in a no-fly zone is when you have a no-fly zone, it's got to be a relatively safe space for the jets and planes you're putting into that space. Now, the Russian jets aside, we've just handed thousands of ground-to-air missiles to a military that wasn't well trained in them. And even though they have IFF, the friend or foe capability in them, it's not clear whether those people were trained to use it. And so there's a fairly high risk of friendly fire downing of aircraft, any aircraft you put in that airspace now, because the people that have the weapons to a large extent are out of communication a lot of the time, because the ground communications aren't very great. And now you're asking them to make a determination between two different kinds of Russian jets, because the kinds of jets they're talking about deploying in Ukraine are Russian. They're not U.S. jets. So the end result is you've got a high probability if anything goes up in the air there, it's going to get shot down. The right response to no-fly zone at the moment is to put in more ground-to-air assets. Let the Ukrainians handle the missiles and let them shoot up in the air. But for God's sake, don't put any of your aircraft up there, because they're probably going to get shot down either by the Russians or the Ukrainians, and neither one of them is ideal. So right now, no-fly is no good. The time to have done the no-fly zone would have been before Russia invaded, and while the Ukrainian military was a relatively cohesive force, and their own advanced ground-to-air assets were largely in place. Much of their larger weapons were taken out in the first couple of days of the war. So now you're left with a lot of people running around with anti-tank weapons, anti-air weapons, and not a ton of coordination, and no way to know for sure if they know the difference between friend or foe. So that creates a problem. That, by the way, it creates a problem. You're going to roll in any other assets right now as well, because you've got a lot of people running around with these anti-armor weapons that are very powerful. The Javelin in particular has proven itself to be a very effective weapon. I think that in the first go-round they had 300 shots, took out 298 tanks. That is an effective weapon. And the mitigation stuff, the grids that Russia put on top of their tanks to stop the Javelins fundamentally didn't function. In fact, there's a lot of stories about a lot of the missile weapons not functioning. The Russian helicopters that have been downed had a number of anti-missile weapon systems on them that apparently didn't function, either due to poor maintenance or because the current weapons being used against them could overcome those systems. So we are learning a lot about the conflict. My view is that still, if you want to prevent war, you really have to create something that makes it clear that nobody wins it. I hate to use a science fiction movie, but War Games comes to mind. And if you remember the end of the movie, the way they stopped the computer was to convince it that in a nuclear war nobody wins. Now we know that nuclear wars are not winnable, but if any leader becomes convinced that they are, we're kind of screwed. And the other problem we've got right now is we were well down the path of removing an awful lot of nuclear weapons. The lesson from this war is that's a bad idea. Now, that's a bad lesson, but it is the lesson of this war, because remember, Ukraine had nuclear capability. We dismantled that capability, and Ukraine asked for an agreement from Russia that they would not invade.
Yep.
Once the nuclear weapons are gone, Russia invaded. Those agreements don't work. And now if I'm a small country and I'm thinking I don't want to get invaded, after seeing that Putin can use the threat of launching a nuclear weapon to act without recourse, without significant recourse, it's hard to believe that everybody's not going to want one. This is an inordinate amount of power. This goes beyond mutually assured destruction and becomes a heavy lever that you can use to get your way. Iran. Just the threat of Iran going nuclear has resulted in decisions that otherwise would not have occurred, and it's pretty clear that Iran's going to go nuclear. I think we probably should just give up anything else, because they were hell bent for leather to do it anyway. And with these examples, they're going to be even more focused. And of course, the Iran nuclear deal, thanks to this war, is all but dead. So in the end, we're making the world a far less safe place to live, and going in the absolute wrong direction. But the only way I can see this changing, and it's been mentioned by other speakers, is if the world collectively stands up and says no more. We're not there yet, and the only way we're going to get there, my own view, is if we have enough deaths to get people upset enough to act in mass, to actually get the populace to rise up against their governments and say, hey, no more of this stuff. We're not going to fund it. We're going to fund maybe defensive weapons, not offensive weapons. And if you're going to promote nuclear expansion, we're not going to vote for you. And if we're underneath you, we're going to just not come to work until you agree with what we want to do. There's only so much a government can do if their populace stands against them. Now, with regard to the folks in Russia, we're approaching 12,000, I think 13,000 people in prison now for protesting in Russia. I was just watching a video though of a military guy on a Russian television station standing up and trying to tell the truth about what's going on in Ukraine, and you've got to figure, it's incredibly brave, because in Russia you do something like that, you're probably going to go to prison. And yet he got up and he would not shut up. I mean, he just kept going and going about, hey, you're not telling them the truth. This is what's really going on there. And he was serving military. It's up on YouTube. I'll post the link in private chat in a minute. But there are people in Russia that are very upset about this, and you can see why. A lot of the Russian and Ukrainian people are intermixed, and so they've got relatives in the Ukraine. They're losing friends in the combat in Ukraine, and let's be clear, Ukraine has done a tremendous amount of damage to the Russian military machine. But go back to the beginning. Had Putin realized that his military would be destroyed by the invasion, he wouldn't have done it. That he could roll through Ukraine and take it over, and easily, much like as he'd done previously, and that was false intelligence. And it was, by the way, the same kind of false intelligence that had the U.S. go into Iraq for WMD. So that was false intelligence. The entire war was based on untruth. And so, at the end, part of our fix to this problem is making sure that leaders recognize the risk they're taking before they take it. By the way, this is not just a military government problem. This is often a problem in business. And a lot of the problems that I've been brought in to correct after the fact are largely due to the fact that the decision makers didn't have good information when going in. In one case, we were talking about a divestiture of a large company, and my group wrote a report saying, yeah, you don't want to sell it to the company that you're considering selling it to, because it will not only destroy this asset, it will be economically unfeasible for us. And the end result is our company lost $5 billion in the decision, because the decision was made 2 days before our report was in, and our report was 2 weeks early. So this idea of decision makers making decisions on bad intelligence is probably the greatest threat that we don't talk about in the world today, because my belief is, had Putin known that going into Ukraine and trying to go street by street and building by building and city by city, fighting the very populace he's trying to overcome, was going to make the failure in Afghanistan look like a cakewalk, he wouldn't have done it. He might have used a different approach, but he wouldn't have done it the way he's done it. And the end result is we've got an avoidable war that now Putin's in a position where he has to push forward. The very sanctions we're placing on Russia mean that Russia has to continue until those sanctions are lifted, because they're effectively bankrupt now. And Putin recognizes that if he fails catastrophically here, he's probably dead. And so giving that guy a choice other than continue or die is our path out of this. And I don't know how that happens. You're certainly not going to relieve him of sanctions while he's fighting the war. And if any politician tries to give him a free pass, that politician's going to be done. And people that go into politics are not known for being that self-sacrificing. They're there, but they're more the exception than the rule. And that's another problem we've got. the very people we put in as leaders are probably the very people that shouldn't be in leaders. They're people that seek status, that have a very tentative grasp of what's true and what's not, and are either directly or indirectly deep followers of Machiavelli, because they'll pretty much willing to do anything to get elected, and once in power they'll stay in power. And those are the people you don't want in power. Ideally, you want to put people in power that are competent but really don't want the job, because then they'll act for the greater good. I think Finland now remains as one of our great examples of a country that is actually well run by people that aren't trying to seek a self-aggrandizement. But if you go across some of the other countries, including my own, that is not a consistent capability. So the mechanism to solve this problem definitively would once again be make sure that politicians that get in power have the right attitude, make sure that there is a mechanism in place that if a politician does get into power with the wrong attitude, that you have a worldwide method to remove them, surgically, not catastrophically. And then it's in everyone's best interest that people that are making decisions with regard to weapons have good intelligence, so they're not starting wars that they would otherwise avoid. I mean, even if we look back at the Second World War, the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan was ill-conceived and catastrophic for them. Germany's attack on Russia was ill-conceived and catastrophic for them. A lot of the major battles and large death counts are a result of people in power just making bad decisions. If we can get them to make good decisions, and we get people in power that have a tendency to make good decisions, then we to a large extent can solve this problem and move forward. Until we get to that point, I'm doubtful we'll be able to do it.
Thank you. This is really excellent discussion. That's why I want to extend these discussions, and I want to go for the concluding remarks. I believe Professor Edward want to add something.
Okay, thank you. And I'll certainly concur with everything that Rob said. I'm happy to hear that Rob is a good libertarian and understands that politicians are dangerous, and that's why we should have a U.S. Constitution that limits power and checks and balances and all those wonderful things. So thank you, Rob.
Just one point, Professor Edward. Like, we arranged Friday very exclusive debate. Professor Rob actually take leads. Mr. Marshall also take lead. Even our debaters actually want you in our debate.
We'll see about
and
that.
It's they are really, trust me, very professional debate. They attend, and I believe that US politician should welcome them in the parliament. They are very high quality debaters. Yes, everyone.
By the way, I'm for term limits in the U.S. as well, because I don't like career politicians. I actually was elected in my town to 3 terms on the town commission. I served essentially as the mayor of the town, and so I saw from the inside. But anyway, I'll make a few generic points here. First of all, I think it's crucial in the long term. I think we're all right. None of us have the answer to what's happening in Ukraine right now. We realize that you have a dangerous psychopath, with nuclear weapons, and we're all hoping. None of us have really the answer, though. I think we all agree that it would be great if the Russian people themselves, one way or the other, remove Putin. But in the long term, again, I think we have to look at institutions within countries, as well as between countries. Again, I like to say make trade, not war, but we have to note that China was correct over the last 40 years with its economic reforms, but then it has decided to crush dissent, to not have an open society. The social credit system is basically George Orwell on steroids. That's not the right approach. So we have to not just say, well, everyone, by the way, the good news is that we went from, I think the Soviet Union had something like 45,000 nuclear weapons. They're down to 5,000. The US had 35,000 or something like that. They're down to 5,000, but still 5,000 can do a lot of damage, and that's the problem. But I would say the other two things to keep in mind is, first of all, China in a sense is the winner in all of this, because they're sort of seeing how the world reacts. We know what they're doing internally. We know that they want to take over Taiwan and extend their power in Asia and in the world. They're looking at this very carefully to see how the West reacts. They're very smart, and so they're gonna try not to make the same mistakes that Putin made. but they're an economic power much more than the Soviet Union, Russia, that I've described as a gas station with nuclear weapons. And so it's going to be a very different issue dealing with the Russians. But again, I'll make my final point is that I'm very bullish or optimistic about the long term for Asia. I mentioned, by the way, the name of the company that made my wonderful thing here is the Anamane Creative in Indonesia. So to you guys there, thank you very much. I hope you're watching this show. I told them to watch the show. But the point is that we see that where you have young people, especially, becoming entrepreneurs, taking advantage of the liberty that they have to produce and to profit from their own values, then you see cultures changing over time. So what I call destructive nationalism gives way to individualism. I don't care where you guys are. I care that, hey, I've got this great guy, Sharif, who puts on these great shows and has some great ideas. I'm working with a bunch of great Africans in Nigeria and South Africa. I'm working with these other people here. I got this guy in Indonesia who's doing this great thing for me. That's the kind of world culture we need to create. And so in the long term, I am optimistic. And I'll say to all you listeners to World Talent Economic Forum, you folks are going to be not only the spearhead of prosperity in Asia and around the world, but you're going to be the spearhead of peace. So thank you, Sharif, and guys, make trade, not war.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Thank you for Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson, what's your concluding remarks today?
Okay, so there are thousands and thousands of problems. Okay, so I don't want to speak about that, but the most important thing is that now we need to find solutions. Okay, solutions based on our collective wisdom. And as I said, I always focus on the collective wisdom. Okay, that means we need to come together. We need to come together, put all our efforts, experience, and knowledge together. Okay. And for this very purpose, I am also the founder of a collaborative platform called Better World Alliance. We have already started getting organizations and individuals to join this one. It will be up very soon. We will create an online platform so that all the organizations that are trying to do something for this world to create a better world, okay, we will come together and we need to really organize ourselves in a very big way. That's why I am suggesting to organize a very big international conference. The conference is going to be called Better World Conference. Okay, so we are looking to bring together people from different sectors, different backgrounds. Okay, not the governments. Of course, the governments might participate, but we, the people, the experts, need to come together. And in this forum or in this event, at the end of this conference, we should be, the people of the world should be able to come up with so many of our own, united declarations, like what we are going to do on global peace, what we are going to do in achieving food security, what we are going to do in terms of addressing this climate change and all these things. So we have to combine the knowledge, and I'm really looking to organize this international conference, and then we can come up with the plans to create a better world. Okay, and these are going to be very strategic and very clear action plans. And the UN has all the sustainable development goals, but they don't, unfortunately, they don't have this. The world don't have this actual action plans to achieve this one. Okay, so that's what we are focusing. We have to achieve these goals, and we need to come up with all this, action plans. So that's what I am thinking to organize, and I would like to welcome everyone to join this, the movement of creating a better world. And as I said before, I'm really creating a very huge global network. Right now, I think already more than 500,000 people are already there in my network, and by end of this year, we should be able to create at least 300 to 500 million people. Okay, so that's what I'm working on now. 24 hours. So it was very nice to meet so many great speakers in today's forum. So thank you so much, World Talent Economic Forum. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Jackson, even we have very high quality content, more than 500. Your millions of people can watch our show and they can join with us in our online initiative. And hopefully, in these COVID situations, it will be very effective. Even many organizations they are joining, and our collaboration is will be helpful for South Asia and for your community. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for joining today's session. Mr. Marshall, what you want to add for today's, especially as a concluding remarks?
Well, my concluding remarks is that I support Mr. Jackson's forum. And again, yes, the Sustainability Development Goals, the 17 Sustainability Development Goals promoted by the United Nations are just that, they're goals. And they do have protocols underneath them, but I think it's important that Jackson brings all these people together. I personally, I think you all know that I support the World Talent Economy Forum to be a venue for this as well. And all the work that Sharif has been doing has been in the forefront. And I also believe that it adds to the topic of what we're talking about today, that if we have more Sharifs in the world, we'll have more chance of world peace. So on that note, I just want to thank you, Sharif, for having everybody here discussing this very vitally important topic. And thank you, Jackson, for organizing millions and hundreds of millions of people. Thank you. And Rob, great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marshalls. Actually, World Talent Economy Forum, it's a people's organization. It's all of the peoples. Those who join, this is your organization. This is Mr. Rob organization, Mr. Marshall organization, Mr. Jackson organization, our audience organization. Those who join, this is your organization. This is not my private property. So, and we will definitely work together and we will solve problem. Mr. Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, we're talking about creating a mechanism that drives peaceful outcomes, and I think this goes back to understanding what we currently have and deciding can we fix it, or do we need to raise up something else to replace it? The United Nations was designed to address the kind of problems that we're having. It was badly designed. At the core of that bad design is this belief that the core countries are largely above the power of the organization, and I don't believe you can have that. You can't have a situation where Russia, for instance, can invade Ukraine and avoid repercussions, or the U.S. invades Iraq and avoids repercussions. If you're going to have a global peace organization, it has to have the power to do what it needs to do that's consistent with its mission, which is to prevent war. And if it's not working, it either needs to be removed and replaced, or it needs to be fixed. And until we have the will to fix or replace the UN, I don't think we've got a path out of this. We don't have enough force to overcome a major power, and we clearly have an issue with the major powers. I was just looking at the relative power of the nuclear bombs we've got, and Edward was correct that we've got far fewer bombs, but we've got far more powerful bombs. The bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 15 and 21 kiloton bombs. The SAR bomb, which Russia has and has had since 1961, is a 50 megaton bomb. So 50 times plus a magnitude greater, so 500 times more powerful than the bombs we've had. Excuse me, bad math. About 25 times more powerful than the bombs we dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So the end result is it takes fewer bombs to take it out. That we shouldn't have any. I mean, the goal for nuclear weapons should be zero, unless we're talking about using them for defense against asteroids. And there, a nuclear bomb may make a difference. But of course, we haven't positioned the weapons against that threat, even though we believe that the dinosaurs were wiped out by asteroids. We still don't have a great defense against asteroids. So it just showcases we're not thinking well on a world basis. We ought to have a consistent list of the top 10 things that will wipe out humanity, and we should be methodically going through that list and removing those items, mitigating every one of them. Last Friday, we debated to a certain extent what the top 5 things were. But the thing is that's where the United Nations should be focused. They should be focused on global threats, and they should be resourced and staffed to a degree where they can accomplish their goal. And that's not true at the moment. And until we fix that, until we have an organization that can act to the benefit of the world, despite what individual governments want to happen, we're going to continually have these blowups until eventually somebody does something so catastrophic we don't come back from it. And sadly, our experience as a race is that we don't get proactive about this stuff. Well, we wait until the threat's so dire that we can't avoid it, and then we start working against it, the pandemic being an example. We could have stopped the pandemic in its tracks early on, but for a lot of reasons, different governments decided not to. They decided the risk of allowing the pandemic to spread was worth whatever benefit they'd considered, and in many countries that was wrong. And a pandemic is a global threat that we should be able to address globally, and clearly we're not. And in the United States, we didn't even address it consistently here, which indicates that we've got a serious problem with regard to scale. So if you can't do it locally, you can't do it internationally. And New Zealand was probably one of the better examples of a country that handled it well. Finland handled it well. The Norwegian countries seem to handle it better, in some cases better than most, in some exceptions a lot worse than most. But once again, showcasing the fact that you need a way to assure that the people that are governing are qualified, competent, and not themselves corrupt. And until we get to a point where we can assure those things, we're going to be here again, and we're going to be here again until the unfortunate time when we have a world catastrophe that will force an outcome, and hopefully most of us survive it. And I would really like to see a different outcome than that. But until we address these problems at the core, I don't think that's possible.
Thank you. This is really excellent discussions, and especially for the global pitch. I believe our politician, policymaker, diplomats, country heads, they will think in that way. If our politicians and the diplomats, they think in that way, I believe we have many solutions to solve this problem. And on the other hand, I request all of the people, we should not support any kind of war around the world, and we should stop war right now. And yes, we can focus on many problems we have, and we can solve this problem together. Thank you, Professor Rob, Mr. Marshall, and Mr. Jackson for joining today's sessions. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. From next week, as USA and Europe, I think time zones change, so we will shift our program. So from Malaysian time, I can start this program for 10 p.m. and I think all of your time zone also plus or minus it will change. So thank you for all of your continuous support, and Mr. Jackson, definitely you are valuable for us. We need very good amount of audience. So as you have millions of people, we want your like speakers and your friends as our audience, and they can join in our forum. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for joining today. Thank you, Mr. Marshalls and Professor Rob, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye-bye.